Okay, it looks like we are operational. Let's get our clickety-clack entry going here for the 28th of April, 2025, in our ongoing year of doom. Bum, bum, bum. And TortuganWordPress.com, Troubles in Paradise, all sorts of wonderful old information that is available freebie for downloading to all concerned. Voila, let's close that window and away we go. About 20 minutes late getting started, but it was kind of worth it because I was researching an interesting little tidbit that I'm going to be slipping into this actual discussion. As you all know, who have been following the old RJ all this time, I'm going through providing a reference bibliography background for Titans, the young Earth creationist tome on dinosaurs. And the reason why this is kind of relevant and familiar with are anyone that lacks a proper reference bibliography to where it's difficult to find out whether they've discussed a topic or not. Hi, Lisa. It's useful to do that. I've been doing it with all the books that I've been doing. It may be boring as hell to some people, but nevertheless, it provides a useful benchmark because you get to measure people's scholarship directly at the source level. And that's why I can be so annoyingly smug to say that when you really look into these works, gosh, they're misrepresenting a ton of stuff. Dumpy's going after colleges. Oh, yeah, he's going after a lot of stuff there. How successful they will actually be is a matter of debate because they're going to be slamming into the law, just like Screwball Kash Patel had a judge arrested for doing something supposedly wrong. It's very probable that ain't going to go very far. So there's going to be lawsuits and crap up the yin yang. I hope the Trumpistas spend the rest of their natural lives in court in one form or another with all of the background of that. But let us move on from all of that material. We're going to be discussing the next part of the chapter where they're discussing some more little dangling loose ends on how, when angiosperms survived and all that. And this is, after all, a Luskin bi-weekly. So we'll be discussing some more technical papers of that and some interesting little sidebars that arose during that point. I had a really nice discussion with Austin Sims about creationism on his channel over the weekend. And for those following me on Twitter, I'm not going to call it X, and Blue Sky, I put the link up on that part. It was a nice little thing about the nature of the scholarship and why it's an important thing to pay attention to, because this kind of bad mindset is having a serious problem for political environments, that the creationist mindset is directly connected to an awful lot of people in the Trump administration. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Speaker of the House Johnson come to mind. They're young Earth creationists. Yeah, plant sperm. It would be so nice. No, angiosperm. That's the fancy term for flowering plants. And it's certainly been known that they appeared they appeared during the Mesozoic. And just how far back and in what form, they've been fiddling around with interesting bits because it involves the origin of flowering plants and what the developmental biology is of all of that. And there's a huge amount of technical literature on the matter, which the creationists don't get terribly close to. But anyway, the little sidebar that I'm going to stick in right off the bat to get it off my head, I get the Institute for Creation Research Acts and Facts hard copy, free. I've got subscribed to them, no cost. Thank you so much. They're available, by the way, at their website. Most of the articles and things, you can get them after the fact. Raise the bar to where having sources and evidence is the norm to join the conversation. That is exactly right. That is the essence of source methods. And if this could be the point where we train people in school to pay attention to this, and that it becomes the standard procedure that when politicians make claims, you want sources. It's not good enough to simply fact check whether the claim they make is valid or not. They should have to offer documentation. We know that there's a tremendously bad level of source scholarship amongst screwball minds. Perfectly fine example, after the bit about Vice President Vance during the campaign was making a blither about whether or not, I think it was after the State of the Union, trying to document, air quotes, a claim that the Trump administration was making about the impact of immigrants on the employment issue and so forth, undocumented migrants. And he proudly proclaimed that they provided 3 sources that filled that in. Well, I went to the website and looked at the things, all secondary, and they didn't actually. So when you look at it from that level, Vice President Vance is operating at kind of the Ken Ham level, or if you look at intelligent design, David Klinghoffer level of secondary repeating tropes class. So anyway, sidebar. One in this that is intriguing of any reality of natural selection, and thing is stopping. There we are. We're starting to move again. Whoops. GOP with their talking points. Yes. The transforming influence of Genesis, worker dignity and safety. This caught my eye because he's trying to make an idea that somehow or other the Reformation set the stage for a recognition of the dignity of labor and all that. And there's a tiny, tiny grain of truth to it. But what intrigued me, of course, was the sources he was drawing on stuff related to Henry Morris and a few other things. But all of the, this is from the current issue, 2025, May, June, of Acts and Facts. All of the sources, the material that he was drawing on like 4 books. None of them was younger than 60 years before he's writing. So you think there might have been some scholarship after that. So I started to look into his background material on this to get some background stuff, because it's going to be probably a topic in the discussion of the political ramifications supposedly of Darwinism, and definitely it would be a good book that we'll be doing on evolution of religion and political ramifications of it. But at any rate, on the down in the article, he brings up William Perkins, who was a 16th century English preacher, reformer, and his sermon, a treatise of the vocalizations or callings of men with sorts and kinds of them and the rights use thereof, and how influential it was. And then he discusses somebody else. English bishop and reformer Hugh Latimer was a student of Perkins's work. In a message that referenced Perkins's treatise, he stated, and he then quotes this thing, the wonderful thing, the savior of the world, blah, blah, and cites this 1935 book by Wright. Yes, had a wonderful, hi, Vesta. As it turns out, thank you, archive.org. All of the works that he was alluding to are available for view at archive.org. None of them to download as PDFs, but you could borrow them and look at them. So I checked up on this. The first order of business was that I was looking up the dates of Perkins and Latimer, and it's a really amazing trick for Hugh Latimer, who was burned at the stake by Queen Mary in the 1550s, to be a student of Mr. Perkins, who was born 3 years after Latimer died. So right off the bat, Perkins, Latimer, it's the backwards relationship going on here. But was he getting this misinformation from Wright? No. It turns out Wright was not inaccurate, and the claims about Latimer relying on Perkins is wrong when you actually looked up the book, because he went on to discuss that Latimer was actually somebody who was Perkins was the natural successor to that. It was the other way around. And so you have to wonder why Guliuzza got into such a mix to begin with. And it also reminds us, Bloody Mary, Queen Mary, the one that came in after. By the way, if you didn't get a chance to watch it, it's been shown on PBS, the Wolf's Hall, which is about Oliver Cromwell, not Oliver Cromwell. Yikes. The other Cromwell. Just a riveting performance. I rank, it was like a 6-part thing on his thing, and there had been a previous season that had gone into his rise and ultimate fall, because he was beheaded by Henry VIII. I rank it with Man for All Seasons as just a riveting entry into the period and the psychological details and all that. Canada's having an election, be interesting, hopefully lead to a liberal majority. Yeah, in fact, it's been argued that Trump's sticking his foot in his mouth and annoying our Canadian neighbors to the north, and here in the Pacific Northwest and in Spokane, where we have such a tight relationship with Edmonton and Calgary and all of that, our TV channels, our PBS feed connects up there into Canada, and so it's a tight historical relationship across that. Very probably will have tainted the Conservatives in such a way that they would want to vote for somebody the opposite of that, and that apparently are the Liberals. So it's going to be kind of interesting. Wait, so is coasting of someone else's work like a high school freshman? Yeah, I think Guliuzza is working is not as good as a high school freshman, because somebody who remembers being a high school freshman, it's perfectly possible that you can at least copy your material accurately. But it's painfully obvious that Guliuzza wasn't even reading this right material accurately, because there's such old works. I think it entirely possible that this is apologetics that he glommed onto long ago. And so he's just riffing off of his older material without actually kind of checking up on it. In the same issue, in fact, a thing that I'm going to be waiting, and it'll be probably a topic for a future Evolution Hour, is a piece by Jeffrey Tompkins, Genomic Tandem Repeats, that's in there. None of these are available yet online, but they eventually will be posted. But what I began to discover, see, whenever I look into these material, I'm doing source analysis. So I'm going down to the footnotes on the end and tracking down all the materials. It turns out all the technical papers that he's citing are available open access, so I'll be able to put them up as links. But I discovered that 4 of the 6 papers, he got the names wrong. And I think in part it was typo finger bits, because B and N and F and G are right next to each other on the keyboard. And I think he hit F instead of G, which is how Wang got turned into Wanf. And but how he turned an R into a P, because they're at opposite sides of the keyboard, I suggest he probably misread it, which is somebody who wears glasses and you can get to the point where your eyeballs are tired or your glasses are needing replacement. You can misread a text. That's perfectly feasible. But what I'll be intrigued to find out once it gets the online version of it available to plug in is, did anyone spot the fact that there were typographical errors in the references? And if so, do they correct them or not? Or do they just repeat it all verbatim from the text that Tompkins put up? So anyway, that's our little sign up on a little sidebar. I thought it was kind of amusing, because most of the time when you look at how creationists are muddling source material, they're not that sloppy. that the quotes actually exist, and the material is done attentively. Michael Denton and others, are generally careful in this area. But once in a while, you get a thing where you go, whoops, this is head up the ass level wrong. Anyway, back around to our little sidebar about angiosperms, which are not the, well, in a way, flowering plants. We are talking about the sex organs of plants when you're talking about flowering plants. So we're getting more dribbling of stuff. They cite a 2020 paper from Brown et al., which I'll be putting the whole link up when we get to this up, on angiosperm munching dinosaurs. I think as a notosaur is the example. And that's hardly as surprising, because paleontologists knew that angiosperms were existing during the late dinosaur period, and so it would be perfectly feasible to do that. However, it had gone into some details on what plants they were talking about, and many of them are extinct forms. And angiosperms proper are actually quite rare in the sample that they were looking at. So all of that little archaeological detail, paleoanthropology, paleoecology issues, are data points that the creationists didn't even think to mention, let alone account for, including, curiously enough, that there's even signs that there were forest fires in the period, because you got some stuff that was charred, which is not exactly flood environment, now is it? So creationists would theoretically need to deal with that. And because that paper had so much information, in my measure, they're misrepresenting that source. So that goes into a different column in my little spreadsheet than others. Others are okay. They're not misrepresenting the content per se. And that would be an example of a paper by Lawton Rue et al. 2000. Unfortunately, I don't have a complete link to the open access thing because it is not open access, but I will be putting a link up to their abstract at Science Direct, which gives a little more than just the abstract. So there's a chunk of material that you can use, and anyone that can wriggle around through their colleges or whatever to find the original text, that'll help. It's on the existence of flowering plants in the Cretaceous. That's all S&T were citing about it. And they did not allude to what the paper was about, really. The various genes that are identified relating to their evolutionary origins. So that's more slippery information. But worse, Sarfati and Tay then went on to go to explicitly claim that this 2009 paper, Bray and Anderson, showed the Carboniferous, courtesy of amber sap. Again, this is another one that, alas, I can't get the full text to you, but I will be putting up the science abstract, so at least you know what paper we're talking about. The paper itself, which I have seen full text, does not claim that these are angiosperms. Their main argument is that they are being produced from the gymnosperms of the period, not angiosperms, and that that this suggests that there is a similarity to the dynamic of producing this kind of chemical in the plants, which is certainly relevant. That aspect of it was not discussed in any way, shape, or form, let alone a creationist explanation for it in Sarfati and Tay's book. Now that we can bring on, that's how the Mandela effect is born, I guess. Our dear old pal, Casey Luskin, and his stupid list. We're now about 10% of the way through their monster list, because remember, they got 800 papers, and I guess they assumed no one would be stupid or annoying enough to try to plow through the whole bloody thing and look them all up. Sorry, that's a challenge that I love doing. Disappointing the creationists aren't that inquisitive regarding data they don't need. Oh yeah, that's the other aspect of that urge to be a parasitical citer. And before I learned sound method, I did that. The Luskin list is a perfectly characteristic thing of where they're basically, it looks like they're just trawling through the titles of the paper and maybe occasionally the abstracts. But remember, this master listing is just the titles. They're not doing any annotations. There's nothing. They're just dumping it as a whole pile up of a list. So the next one on their list are a couple ALU related papers. Lou et al. From 2021 on the role that some have come to play in chromatin organization, which again is a topic that we've already bumped into previously. So it's a lot of things that are rehashing the primary points, which is, yeah, we know that 5, 10, 15, 20 maybe % of these various retrotransposons and junk DNA actually end up having some influence on things, not always because the thing itself does anything, but because it alters the dynamic of the things it's in. Because remember, adding a bunch of retrotransposons or repeats will alter the topology of a molecule if they get stayed in there, and that can change the way, and they can act as anchoring sites, because one of the whole things about, say, ALU is how it connects up neatly to things, including mirror images of itself, which we've explained earlier, which is why we don't have tails. Anyway, they go into a lot of the details of this, but it's not really bringing up any. Well, they alluded briefly to the evolutionary origin. Not the creationist doing this. The Lou paper on the evolutionary origins of ALUs. But the detailed history of that was way more prominent in the other paper, which is Cho et al. 2021. On these ALU variants that are changing the cleavage sites in a bunch of primates. And it's actually primates, not us. It's old world monkeys in a variety of things. As to when this happened, that's going back 25 million years in this case. And they were able to break down the different branching variations that lead off to a bunch of different lineages that have slight variations on this stuff. If Luskin ever wanted to offer any ID explanation of why those relationships are the way they are, and were they designed, and was the designer really keen 25 million years ago to make sure that these ALUs were finagling themselves into various old world monkeys? Think about that sometimes, Casey. Might be kind of fun, but I'm not sure it'd be going too much of anywhere. The third paper on the Luskin list that I looked at was Stagstead et al. 2021 on a particular protein that I hadn't heard about, SFPQ, and the role it plays in these circular RNA molecules that are connected up to introns and alternative splicing. And James Tortucan down at our sperm without flagellum viable. Yeah. Well, they'd have no way to get to where they want to go if they didn't have their little wiggly parts. So they would just have to kind of hope that the flow would manage to bump them in there. Although I can imagine theoretically, I don't know that anybody's ever done a study on that, because sperm is produced in such ginormous quantities that is it possible that a sperm with a malfunctioning flagellum that does not itself have any propeller parts is just carried along in the mass? And if it is the one that happens to bump into the egg and cause it to fertilize, this is a sidebar I wasn't expecting to go into, but it doesn't seem all that inconceivable to me. If anybody knows any technical literature on that little point, let me go. Make a point of mentioning it in the comments on the channel once the thing is posted up. Anyway, so this thing was going on, this paper from Stagstead was going on about how SFPQ, the depletion of it, can have serious effects. It can result in premature termination events, and that piqued my curiosity about what the hell was going on in here. And I'm wondering whether or not the reason why they included it on the list at all is because it gets a few mentions of ALUs, and because the methodology they were using to evaluate the molecules was using the same techniques that are in the ENCODE project, which that may have latched onto things. Right? Does the designer redesign the same trait system in various species after the genus splits? Oh, yeah, that would be a level of thinking that zero intelligent designers ever get to. I know of no counterexample. There is no instance anywhere in the entire intelligent design literature, and this applies also to old Earth creationism. I mentioned this when I was on my little chat with Austin Sims over the weekend, of them doing systematics. The only clunky attempts at systematics in the anti-evolution biz are the baraminology work that's done in young Earth creationism. And I point out the reason why they do that is because they're forced into doing it because they've got the double bottleneck of the creation week that produces all extant kinds, and then the filter of the flood, where a portion of those, or the descendants of those with their supposed heterogeneous heterozygosity aspects, details of which are always patent pending, if you look at Carter and all these other people, eventually leads to the current metals. Well, young intelligent designers, even if they vaguely think about the flood, old Earth creationists as well, Fazal Rana has some weird ideas that maybe it was somewhere from 40 to 90,000 years ago, and it was local but destroyed all of human beings who were somehow restricted to there, and they haven't really bothered about filling in those little details. We're going to be alluding to it in volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, because it's such a screwball idea. But other than that, they don't think about any of that. And it means that without that prod of the young Earth creation, as creation week and the flood, there's apparently no incentive for them to put their little brain gears in play to try to figure out, oh, is James Tour ID? Well, that's interesting. He certainly seemed come originally from the ID department to start with, as has turned out to be the case from a variety of the people he's appearing on, and the fact that he has brought up soft tissue being young elements. And it sounds like he's, if not a full-out closet young Earth creationist, he certainly is buddies with a hell of a lot of them, because he's appearing on a lot of young Earth creationist apologetics. Gutsick Gibbon recently did an analysis on it, and Dave Farina and Joel Duff and the various people have been calling attention to all of this stuff. Again, this material we'll be bringing up and with all the little sources and sidebars in volume 2 of Rocks, because it's a fun little background information on that. Anyway, so what intrigued me then was this molecule SFPQ, and I immediately checked to see, are there any other papers on that in the Luskin list? And the answer is no. So I was now immediately piqued to try to figure out a little bit more about it. And it's a thing that's just kind of starting to look into it. So there turned out to be a bunch of useful papers on this subject that I'll be putting links up to that you can look into. Lim et al. 2020 and Gordon et al. 2021, Malnar and Rogelj 2021, and Thivirge et al. 2024. Very, very recent stuff. Which delve into the parts that these things are playing in neuronal function. Apparently, in that zone, it's an area that's only about 300 amino acid size that is getting fiddled with. So that's another thing about the scale of stuff in a genome that's ginormous. There's just narrow little blobs where this is going on, which again is not really helping the argument that the vast majority of junk DNA are actually doing anything. In this case, there's a little theodicy angle because these things can, if they get misregulated in a lot of different ways, they can cause problems, including cancers. So, and I think ALS, there's some linkages up to there. So I would say that it's always interesting to see who people hobnob with in regards to James Tour. We know that there are a portion of young Earth creationists who have been playing under the ID banner. Paul Nelson and John Mark Reynolds are the most prominent ones. And then, of course, you've also got this closet element where people can kind of hover in an environment without actually sharing the worldview all the way down because they don't compare notes. So you can have people like Rick Santorum and others who are vaguely intelligent design in politics who will be schmoozing with Tony Perkins, who is a Ken Ham style young Earth creationist. But I doubt sincerely when they're doing their little political coffee clutches, they're not talking about the booking regimen on board the Ark for therapsids. This is just not a topic that's going to be coming up. So it's perfectly feasible in that social dynamic for a young Earth creationist to be closeted and not bring it up much. We also see that John Sanford and a few other creationists are invigorating themselves in and start having contributions to intelligent design, air quotes, books in the last 4, 5, 6 years. So it's a blurry line. I would not explicitly categorize Tour as a full young Earth creationist unless I could have him put a marker down where he's explicitly talking about the flood or the age of the Earth or something like that. But he's getting awful close with that soft tissue thing because he's explicitly thinking, well, that means that the dinosaurs can't be all that old now, can they, if we're finding soft tissue? James Tour's, yes, maybe Tour's position is trapped in the Mott and Bailey attack origin of life research while locking up his own position hidden away behind the moat. Yeah. That's entirely possible. Remember, for all practical purposes, Tour is a one-trick pony. So far, he has not expounded on things other than the origin of life variables that he's bumped into with Grayson Hawk and, of course, Dan Farina or Dave Farina. That also reminded me curiously, because when I was checking up for the linkages and that for the talk I had with Sims on the weekend, I happened to bump into a thing that I'd forgot to put linkages in before, that I'd forgot I had a discussion a few years back, or it was literally initially listed as a debate with Sidebar on God or not in relation to origins of life issue, and I was defending an atheist materialist stance on that. And it was moderated, fortunately, by the incomparable Gutsick Gibbon. And we just actually didn't have a debate so much as a genuine discussion on the back and forth of the biology and the formation of things and what layers and chronology and stuff was going on. And Garda is not a young Earth creationist, so he was not trying to defend that stance on stuff. And when I looked at the thing to put in my notes, what the link to was, I was delighted because I hadn't really paid attention to the various commenters on there, and the comments in there were just delighted with the thing. They said that it wasn't a debate; it was like a class, to where we were getting all of this neat discussion on that. And I know that Erica really enjoyed the discussion and all, and we were hoping that that would go that way. So I think that went exceedingly well. Yes, Mr. Farina, take the chalk. Yes, that's yeah. I think if there's one little sidebar, and I'd mentioned it some months ago, or that if there's one quibble I would have with Dave, and I would probably have it too under certain circumstances. I think he raises his thermostat way too high on the rhetoric when he's going after these things. In person, when he's just talking with people on a normal level, he's not truculent or that at all. But he does tend to ratchet up the rhetoric when he's going after that. And I can appreciate the style of it, but I don't think he handles it as smoothly, say, as somebody like uh, Milo Rossi, who can be deliciously foul mouthed, but yet not aggressive. And for that matter, Erica, who can just crush you underneath her stuff, but she still comes across as just sweet and friendly. And I do not profess that I have that skill to be able to be that genteel on that. But yeah, the idea of a discussion rather than the conventional debate format where people are thrashing stuff out, I think is a much more productive way. And if we see the end of air quotes conventional debates where people are trying to score points and bringing up their PowerPoints and trying to lob material back and forth, I find that very uninteresting as an approach. Okay, well, my gosh, we got about halfway through. Let me put up our thank you notes for our patrons, which things would be much murkier than it would be without them, because as a Social Security retiree that has that is still my main income, plus what I can get from Patreon, plus what I can get from book royalties that trickle in month by month. That's what I live on. I do not have a wealthy inheritance. I do not have a cheating grift like Steve Bannon or Donald Trump. I am just a normal little scholarly person and retiree here in Spokane, trying to make ends meet. In fact, my red ink cartridge just ran out, and it'll be a week or more before I can have money to be able to get a replacement on the thing. So I've got to do juggling acts on saving files and doing ways to avoid having to actually print things up. That's the way things go. Social media, blood sport debates, corporate pundits have destroyed. Well, one could argue that they would be flimsy if it had that aspect. I think charitability has always been frayed, and when you live in interesting times, that tends to happen. We've gone through this sort of thing before. When you look at if you think about how families were torn apart during the Civil War, our Civil War, when you look at the same thing that went on in Britain during their Civil War back in the 17th century, or the 30 Years' War in Germany, or the difficulties that took place in the 20th century when we had supposedly you had to choose between Hitler and Stalin, communism and fascism as a model, and everything seemed to be teetering on the brink. We've muddled through a lot of that. I think at core, I've been bumping into a variety of people online where so long as you just have dueling opinions and dueling ideologies, you can't make much headway on it. And I try to drag people onto the data floor as much as possible, or to remind them that they are making arguments that actually don't have a data floor, and they don't know it because they're relying on secondary sources, not looking at the originals. And you're seeing this in spades when you're trying to deal with Trumpistas, because I think your average Trump believer knows no more about Trump's background or the fiddly bit realities of what's going on with the various things about migrants and tariff policy than your average creationist knows about the details of the articular quadrate dentary squamosal jaw shift in therapsids in the reptile mammal transition, or the dynamics of ALU retrotransposons. And so they don't realize what they don't know because they're drawing on an ideological echo chamber, which is all from the fact that we've become much more fragmentary in terms of media input. Gone are the days when 50, 60% of the population would be watching the same media, so that they would be watching Walter Cronkite or Huntley and Brinkley on the evening news. They would be having information that is connecting up with what they would be reading in daily newspapers and all of this, where now we have little echo chambers that look really professional. If you look at the stuff from Newsmax and the kind of material that everybody can put the little blue screen up, and suddenly, kapoom, they look like they're just as wonderfully and professional as anybody else. But the content can be downright flat earth level bad. But if there's no way of checking it, then there's no way of finding that out. So if we have a principle that if people don't provide sources for their arguments, or when prodded can do that, then why should you listen to them, no matter what they say? I proceed on the nodes of litmus test elements. So just as if somebody is suddenly waving Kent Hovind videos at me, I instantly know by a methods direction that they can never have fact-checked anything Kent Hovind said. Otherwise, they wouldn't be Hovindistas. And the same thing goes for people who are Trumpistas, that in order to be somebody who would support that person, they would have to not really know about what the hell is going on things. And so until you probe that, so that they are now having to defend their lack of scholarship and source field, then you can start making some progress about trying to get them to rethink maybe what they're doing. Although if you're dealing with a full-out Tortugan-style mind, the kind that you would encounter in flat earthers, who are an extreme case where no amount of information can possibly persuade them, it just bounces off the mind shell and they move on. That class of people you're never going to be able to persuade. But we still don't have a close measure of just how many people are in the fuzzy middle who are saddled with an inadequate methodology, but aren't necessarily incapable of graduating away from that. Because source methods is not something that people do naturally. I didn't do it naturally. I had to learn about it through looking at the way we dealt historiography and history analysis in college. Other people that I know who have slid into it have done exactly that. They've kind of just mutated into a source methods thing on their own. And I think we can maybe make some more progress if we can jack it up to the point of where people are actively thinking about this from the gate, rather than something that they kind of flow into in the course of things. So there we go. That's my continual hobby horse that I have to deal with. Anyway, we are 38 minutes. Let me put up my little Rocks Were There advert as well. Shilling for the volume 1 of the book. Volume 2 of the book will be just as meaty, if not more so. And of course, we'll have the advantage of being up to date in the same way that the publication date on the original Rocks Were There had material that was right up to the time when we constructed the finished text gap. So we will be doing exactly the same thing right up to the wire for Rocks Were There Volume 2. Enjoy. Now we'll take some slurp of tea. And I will remind everybody that one of the ginormous toolkits that we have available here in the 2020s that we didn't have in times past is that we have an accessibility to source information that is unparalleled. Just as I illustrated today in finding out just exactly what a bad scholar Guliuzza can be, because I could look up the original source material for this Wright book from 1935 because it was available directly online. And therefore, everybody's got this toolkit that there's no excuse whatsoever for people being uninformed or, well, I didn't know anything about that. MTG wants to run for Senate. Maybe we can get rid otherwise. Yeah. Well, it's going to be kind of interesting to find out if my anticipations are correct. In fact, there was a Trumpista that was smugly thinking that, oh, I'm wrong because I'm some pro-communist lefty for suggesting that we may be headed for a Trump crash, and we haven't get that yet. No, we've got the grumblings and rumblings of problems underfoot, which is why the stock market's 4,000 points below. The Dow is below where it was under the Biden high. But you've got these serious problems. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the biggest employer in her home district, is a furniture company that could be in deep doo-doo because they really employ an awful lot of undocumented workers as cheap labor. And that's going to disappear, even without actually directly rounding up and physically exporting people or shoving them on the planes. The fact that it's pushing so many undocumented workers underground, and therefore they're not going to be showing up for work because they don't want to be taken away and have their families broken up. So if it turns out that you've got a major economic collapse coming and the biggest employer in her district suddenly gets into big trouble, who will know what will be happening in the 26 midterms? It's clear from her mindset that nothing can persuade her of anything. She is operating at Kent Hovind level, impervious to evidence level. She's arrogant. She believes herself to be fantastically well-informed. She goes into righteous outrage based upon her incredible ignorance in just exactly the way an ignorant ideologue can be. And it's one of the ongoing tragedies of what used to be the Republican Party that she is in such a position of prominence. Her positions are so screwball that she should never have been on a committee, and frankly, should never have been reelected. And yet, there we are. So they are symptoms of a radically serious problem for how we're dealing with the election and media and information modes. If I'm right, that we are headed for a major train wreck, high unemployment, high inflation, amazingly, which is not easy to do in a depression condition. This is a strange mutant version of a stagflation condition. But I think such a thing is theoretically possible because so many of our core major industries are controlled by so few companies, and they are all operating on tight margins. There's only a limit to how much they can cut costs. So if they've got people squibbling to maintain their profit margin, the only thing they can do with sagging sales is to raise prices. And with the impetus of that from Trump is on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again on tariffs, but he is in a state of dementia, and he's totally obsessed with this as a worldview. So he's going to go back to it and back to it and back to it. And even if he only institutes mildly severe tariffs rather than draconianly crazy train tariffs, it's still a drag on the economy. So anyway, let us replay the 1880s and 90s when we ended up with a ginormous depression, the worst in the 19th century, that ultimately led to a really big progressive reform in the early 20th century. And just as the ginormous 1929-30 depression ended up producing a big sweep for progressive movements by the 32 and 28 or 30 and 32 elections on. So there can be, through the dark clouds, some potential silver linings. When you look at the kind of size of rallies, including in Nampa, Idaho, and Montana, and the lap from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Bernie Sanders when they've been on the road. There's a lot of pent up uncertainty and anxiousness going on there. And if we can finally get their act together to where that kind of progressive, genuine populism that can do some really serious reforms, which we need a ton of them. We need probably a guaranteed national income to eliminate the whole welfare system. That's a Milton Friedman idea. Much cheaper to do it that way. We need a national health care system. We need to genuinely reform our immigration system. The vast majority of these undocumented workers should have been made green cards and path to citizenship. DACA should have been finalized. There's a whole bunch of things to do. So anyway, greetings, Freedom Day holiday commemorating the election amendment. Thank you for my refugee status as white Southern African, but I will decline the offer at this time because maybe I'll reconsider in 3 years. Yes, it's the weird ironies when we start seeing how much the Trump administration is hypocritical. They were okay when right-wing circuit court judges were basically issuing blanket injunctions to apply to the entire United States. But when a liberal appointed judge does the same thing, suddenly they're screaming bloody murder. And how much of things they'll actually want to apply. If you want to look at people who misrepresented themselves in their immigration status thing, Melania Trump seems to fall into that category. And you could argue that under the kinds of rules that they're starting to apply in the Trump administration, she could be deported. Wouldn't that be an amusing thing? We have a convicted felon as Trump. Maybe we can deport the first lady too if we start getting sticklers on these things. So it's crazy and absurd and pathetic, but not surprising because Trump 2.0 is Project 2025 plus vendetta. And they put in all of these Fox Trump Pravda crazy train people from Hegseth to Kash Patel and all the rest, Bondi. In the Justice Department that are way above their Peter Principle level of incompetence. And we're going to have to deal with it for the next few years until we can get all of this sorted out. But there's enough intellectual capital and good ideas knocking around from people. There was a wonderful discussion Pete Buttigieg did on one of the channels just a few weeks ago, explaining some of the directions that we need to go. And if the Trump administration kind of breaks a lot and just vaporizes stuff, that gives us an opportunity, instead of just putting the old pieces back together, of making better systems from the ground up. So it's going to be an exciting time, provided that we don't get full Goebbels going on the Trump 2.0 regime, and we can still hold on to our civil rights and still maintain an independent functioning system. The fact that we have a fairly dynamic federal system, and the fact that we have a judicial system where the Trumpistas were not able to take charge. One of the things that helped grease the wheels for Nazism is the fact that a bunch of hyper-conservative Prussian Junkers were in control of the court system left over into the Weimar government. So they basically rubber-stamped the Nazi regime. We don't have that dynamic fully in our current judicial system. So things are interesting. Anyway, there we are, a little past 48 minutes. Any last minute questions or comments from our little peanut gallery there? If not, I will let you kids venture off. Keep your guard out for the rampaging wooden penguins. You never can tell. They can turn on you in a moment. And everybody stay safe. Hug your relatives and kids and grandkids and all the rest to remind people about how precious everything is, and that we got to remember, as It's a Wonderful Life would have it, remember Zuzu's petals, remember what's important, and don't lose sight of that. So everybody stay safe, and we will catch you next week and in 2 weeks with another charming Casey Luskin thing.